Thank you for staying with Benchmark. In this last segment today, we tackle the hot topic of the moment, the budget, which was presented to Parliament by President Mahinda Rajapaksa last week. Here's Anushan Selvaraja with more.
Welcome to the Voice of Business. Joining me on the show this week is market analyst and LMD columnist Hasita Premaratne with the latest on the bourse. Now let's talk about the talk of town, Hasita, the budget of course. What are your thoughts, especially in the light of the announcement that the rupee will now be subject to depreciation? What are the pros and cons, keeping in mind inflation, the trade deficit and so on?
Yeah, I think the budget came out and spelled out the kind of the 3% depreciation, which I thought was anyway going to happen in the market, and particularly when you look at the way the balance of payments and the trade deficit was widening, and maybe there was a threat on the balance of payments this year. Anyway, I thought the depreciation would have happened even if the budget didn't spell that out in words. So on one side you can see that the reality check has been done, and probably the right thing has happened in terms of the currency to allow to depreciate, because if you compare it with some of the regional currencies like India, which has depreciated within 4 months about 15%, Bangladesh currency about 10%. So in that backdrop we were appreciating about 0.5. So naturally Sri Lankan currency had to go somewhere on the other end, which I thought was controlled under the circumstances, but now it had been again pushed to a different band altogether. The way it happened can be debated, because we are supposed to be in a free market environment, but looks to be that it's pretty much controlled, and that became kind of obvious when this kind of a statement was made in a budget speech. The good side of the budget is that it has been very consistent with the last year's budget, because last year's budget was a landmark budget, probably the best budget in the history of Sri Lanka, and in 2012 obviously there can't be more excitement expected, because last year was giving you the ultimum, and this year. So the good news is that most of the policies, particularly from a tax rate angle, things have been consistent, which is very important for the investor, because you need to understand the government policy and its stable framework and the consistency over a period of time. So we've seen the first round of consistency in this budget, which is good. There's a shift from the importer supported sort of environment that we saw last budget to more export oriented budget this year, promoting exports, which I think again is a good thing, because last year's impact of supporting, or rather keeping the rupee at a particular level, maybe the last year budget certain proposals to reduce duties and taxes to encourage selected imports had an impact on the trade deficit, which widened to almost over $5 billion level over a period of 9 months. The core areas of apparel, core areas of tea, rubber, and the top 2-3 export categories have been specifically targeted to further improve, while there are some other areas have been earmarked as well. So talking again about imports, another good thing is that from the traditional Western markets of maybe US and the Europe, there is a clear sort of a policy proposal that has been made to look at the emerging markets, because whether we like it or not, in the next 5 to 10 years, that's where the real momentum would be. In that backdrop, how I see it is that government will have to take those proposals into action and ensure that there are some fundamental FTAs and related the free trade agreements, and some trade agreements are being created to support the private sector to get into these export mode. And if that is done, I think that's a very important proposal to capture new markets for the Sri Lankan manufacturer and Sri Lankan service providers. There is a bit of salary increase that have been proposed for the public sector. While it's good from one side, it's important that the monetary authorities do take note of the possible demand increase through this, and that possible demand pull inflation that could be created. So that is a important area. Probably the budget need to or the monetary authorities need to follow up post budget to ensure that the cost pressures and the inflation pressures don't go out of hand. But I don't think it will really go out of hand, but there is a possibility in the short term that the rates, the inflationary condition might slightly increase, maybe 1 to 2 percentage levels.
Hasita, what impact, if any, has the recent takeover bill, the revival of the underperforming enterprise and unutilized assets, had on the bourse, given that 2 listed companies have had their shares suspended as a result of it, for namely hotel developers as in Hilton and Pelwata Sugar?
More than the 2 companies that are listed, that are listed in the market, or that was listed in the market, what is more important is the signal, the macroeconomic fundamentals and the policy framework that get communicated through this particular bill to the investor. That's what is more important. So I think in that context, that hurt the investor confidence to some extent. There's no doubt about that. The bill, the fundamental understanding of the bill, I don't dispute. I think it's a good thing. Good, it had a justifiable, good reason to it. But between the initial understanding and the concept of the bill and what ended up ultimately, probably there were a lot of mismatches, and that's where the problem is, and that's where different reasons and different arguments got into the middle. So in that context, I think that's where people will have some kind of a issue here in their investor confidence level, particularly the foreign investor. But having said that, even the local investor, I would say the local more fundamental investors do look at these things pretty seriously before they make their investments. And even in the budget, there was a proposal relating to 37,000 acres or hectares of plantation land to be kind of taken back and released to different parties. So once again, while it might be a good thing actually, how it's being done has to be very carefully handled by the authorities, because if you don't do that, it gives the wrong message to the investor who's ready to come into the market.
That was Hasita Premaratne in conversation with Anushan Selvaraja. That's all we have time for today. See you again next week.